Murder Beneath the Venice Moon, a Hercule Poirot mystery. In the style of Agatha Christie, Chapter 1, An Invitation to the Palazzo. The October of 1936 lay upon Venice like an old velvet glove, worn, fragrant, and faintly stained at the cuffs. The summer crowds had long since retreated to Paris and London, leaving the canals to the gulls, the gondoliers, and those few visitors of a more contemplative disposition. Among the latter was one Captain Arthur Hastings, who stood that grey afternoon upon the steps of the Hotel Danieli, wrestling with a leather suitcase and a letter that had, 3 days earlier, arrived at his door in Mayfair. The letter was from Poirot. "My dear Hastings," it had read in that small, precise hand which always reminded one of a piece of fine embroidery. "I find myself in Venice for the autumn, having accepted the hospitality of the Contessa di Marchetti at her palazzo upon the Grand Canal. The Contessa, alas, has gathered about her a most peculiar collection of guests. Artists, lawyers, a doctor, a young American heiress, and a certain Englishman whose face I do not trust. She has confided to me that she fears something. What? She will not say. I have therefore extended my stay. If you could find it convenient to join me, mon ami, I should be most grateful. Bring your good humour and a warm coat. The wind from the lagoon is treacherous. Poirot." Hastings had read the letter 3 times in his study, and then, with the impulsiveness of a man whose own life had grown a little dull, had booked passage upon the very next train. Now, weary from 2 nights upon the wagon-lit, he was deposited by a wheezing motoscafo at the steps of the Palazzo Marchetti, a great pink and white confection of marble that rose from the water like a wedding cake left out in the rain. The door was opened by an elderly manservant in a black coat. "Capitano Hastings, Signor Poirot, he expects you, please." The interior of the palazzo was at once magnificent and a little melancholy. Frescoes peeled gently from the ceilings. Chandeliers of Murano glass hung silent in vast cold rooms. A smell of old wood, beeswax, and the faintly brackish water of the canal pervaded everything. The manservant led Hastings up a stone staircase, along a corridor hung with portraits of long-dead Marquettis, and into a sitting-room overlooking the canal. There, in a brocaded armchair quite too large for him, sat Hercule Poirot. He was dressed as ever with the most exacting care. A dark suit, a pearl-grey cravat, his patent shoes gleaming. He rose at once, his moustaches quivering with pleasure. "Hastings? Ah, but it is good to see you. You are tired, yes? The journey is long. Sit, sit. I shall ring for tea. Poirot, my dear fellow, what on earth have you got yourself into? A palazzo? A countess? Mysterious guests?" Poirot smiled, that small dry smile which Hastings had come to associate with the workings of those famous little grey cells. "It is, perhaps, nothing. Or perhaps it is everything. The Contessa Beatrice di Marchetti. She is the widow of the late Count, who died some 5 years ago. She inherited this palazzo and a fortune of considerable size. She has no children. And she has, my friend, a habit of collecting around her people who interest her. This week she has collected 8. He produced a small notebook and consulted it with the air of a chef, reviewing his ingredients. There is, firstly, the Signor Lorenzo Vianello, a lawyer from Milan, a man of perhaps 60 years, very correct. He manages the Contessa's affairs. There is the Signora Adelina Russo, a painter, much younger, perhaps 35, flamboyant, possessed of a temper. There is Dr. Emil Krause, an Austrian physician resident in Venice, who attends the Contessa for her heart. There is Miss Cornelia Whitfield, an American of perhaps 23 years, very pretty, very rich, who came with letters of introduction from the Contessa's cousin in Boston. There is her companion, the formidable Mrs. Beale, who watches over her like a hen with one chick. There is Signor Paolo Marchetti, the late Count's nephew, the heir presumptive, you understand. There is Mr. Edmund Tarrant, the Englishman of whom I wrote, a dealer in antiquities, charming, plausible, and to my mind not entirely to be trusted. And finally there is Father Domenico, the Contessa's confessor, who comes most evenings to dine. A regular cast of characters, Hastings murmured. A regular cast of motives, my friend. The Contessa is wealthy. The Contessa is old. The Contessa has no children. You see how the wind blows. You think someone means to harm her? Poirot was silent for a moment, gazing out of the tall window at the slow brown water of the canal. A gondola passed, its prow cutting a quiet wake. I do not know, Hastings. She has spoken to me of small things. A letter that did not arrive. A piece of jewellery moved. A footfall in the corridor at 3 a.m, trifles. But she is frightened, and it is the experience of Hercule Poirot that when a woman of 70 is frightened, there is usually something to be frightened of. The clock upon the mantel struck 5. From somewhere below, a bell rang softly. Poirot rose and adjusted the position of an ornament upon the table by 1/4 of an inch. Dinner is at 8. You will meet them all. Observe, Hastings. Listen. And, for the love of heaven, do not tell anyone that I am a detective. The Contessa has presented me as a retired civil servant from Brussels. It is more amusing so. Hastings laughed, despite his weariness. The wind off the lagoon rattled the casement, and somewhere in the palazzo a piano began, very softly, to play. Chapter 2. Dinner among strangers. The dining room of the Palazzo Marchetti was a long, narrow chamber, whose walls were panelled in a rose-coloured silk that had begun, in places, to fray. A table of dark walnut ran the length of it, set with old silver and candelabra of twisted glass. Above hung a fresco, much restored, depicting Venus rising from the sea, her expression somewhat anxious, as though uncertain of her welcome. The Contessa Beatrice de Marchetti sat at the head of the table. She was a small woman, very thin, with hair the colour of old ivory drawn back in a chignon. Her eyes, which had once been the celebrated dark eyes of a beauty, were now sharp and rather tired. She wore black silk and a single rope of pearls. Her hands, weighted with rings, trembled very slightly upon the stem of her wine-glass. Capitano Hastings, she said, in English flavoured by long residence in Italy. You are most welcome. Signor Poirot has spoken of you with such affection. You must consider yourself one of the family for as long as you wish to stay. You are very kind, Contessa. Hastings looked about him. The company was assembled. To the Contessa's right sat Signor Lorenzo Vianello, the lawyer, a tall, lean man with a face like a melancholy hawk, his black hair streaked with silver, his manners impeccable and his eyes, Hastings noted, never quite still. Beside him sat Adelina Russo, the painter, in a dress of vivid green that did her no favours. She was handsome rather than pretty, with strong dark brows and a laugh that came too readily. Opposite Dr. Emil Krause, a stout, bearded Austrian, with the air of a man who has seen too much of human folly to be surprised by any of it, was engaged in conversation with Miss Cornelia Whitfield. The American girl was indeed very pretty, a small, vivid creature with hair, the colour of new wheat, and a manner of looking at one as though one had just said something delightfully wicked. Behind her chair, in a place a little apart, sat Mrs. Beale, large, grey, watchful, eating her soup as though it had personally offended her. At the foot of the table was Paolo Marchetti, the nephew. He was perhaps 35, dark, good-looking in the Italian manner, but with a discontented mouth. Beside him sat Mr. Edmund Tarrant, and here Hastings, glancing at him over the candles, understood at once what Poirot had meant. Tarrant was a man of perhaps 40, fair, very well tailored, with a smile that was a little too ready, and eyes that took everything in and gave nothing back. He was speaking, in his quiet, agreeable voice, of a piece of Roman glass he had recently acquired in Ravenna. Father Domenico, the confessor, a stooped old man with a great beak of a nose, completed the party. He spoke little and ate less. The dinner proceeded through its courses: a soup of clams, a risotto black with cuttlefish ink, a fish baked with herbs, and a course of veal. The wine was old and very good. The conversation moved in the elegant, somewhat brittle fashion peculiar to such houses. Talk of the autumn weather, of a recent concert at the Venice, of an exhibition of Tintoretto sketches, yet beneath the surface, Hastings, perhaps schooled by Poirot's earlier words, felt undercurrents. The Contessa, gracious as she was, seemed at moments to retreat into private worry. Her eyes would rest upon one face, then another, with a flicker for something that was not quite affection. Adelina Russo drank rather too much, and her laughter grew louder. Paolo Marchetti scarcely addressed his aunt, though he watched her constantly. Vianello, the lawyer, kept his counsel. Tarrant, with the air of a man entirely at ease, spoke charmingly to Cornelia Whitfield. And Cornelia, Hastings noticed, blushed once or twice, and glanced at Tarrant in a manner that did not escape the granite attention of Mrs. Beale. Then, somewhere between the fish and the veal, the matter of the brooch arose. "My dear Beatrice," said Adelina Russo, leaning forward, "you are not wearing the Marchetti emerald tonight. I felt sure you would. It is the only piece of jewellery in all Venice that I covet." The Contessa's hand strayed to her throat, almost involuntarily. "The emerald," she said, "is in my safe. I have not worn it for some weeks. It is too heavy for an old woman's neck." "What nonsense," said Adelina. "You wore it at the Easter ball, and you looked 20 years younger." Paolo Marchetti said, without looking up from his plate, "The Marchetti emerald is a remarkable stone, 68 carats. It belonged to a doge in the 16th century. My uncle, the late Count, used to say it was insured for 9 million lire." There was a silence. The Contessa set down her glass. "It is in the safe," she said again, more firmly. "And there it shall remain." Edmund Tarrant smiled. "A wise precaution, Contessa. There are unscrupulous persons in this world." Hastings caught Poirot's eye across the table. Poirot's face was, as ever, smooth and benign, but one very small movement of his moustache spoke volumes. He had noted it. He had noted, perhaps, much more. After dinner, the company removed to the salon for coffee. Cornelia Whitfield, prevailed upon, played a little Chopin upon the old piano. The Contessa retired early, pleading fatigue and a tightness in her chest, and Dr. Krauss, duty and physician's habit combined, accompanied her to the foot of the stairs. At 11 o'clock the company dispersed to its several rooms. Outside, a thin rain began to fall upon the canal. The candles guttered. Somewhere far away, a bell tolled 12. Hastings, settling at last into a bed whose linen smelt faintly of lavender and damp, told himself that he had imagined the whole atmosphere. He fell asleep almost at once. He was woken at 3:30 by a scream. Chapter 3. The hand. Upon the carpet the scream came again, high, broken, unmistakably a woman's voice, and was followed by the sound of running feet upon stone. Hastings was out of bed and into his dressing gown before he was properly awake. He flung open his door. The corridor beyond was dimly lit by a single oil lamp upon a side table. In its yellow light he saw figures emerging from other doorways. Paolo Marchetti, half-dressed, his hair on end. Tarrant in a magnificent silk dressing gown of dark red. Dr. Krauss in striped pyjamas, his beard wild. "What is it? What has happened?" The cry came from the western end of the corridor, the Contessa's wing. Hastings ran. As he turned the corner, he nearly collided with Poirot, who had appeared from his own room fully dressed, save for his collar, as though he had not been to bed at all. "Hastings! Quick!" The Contessa's chamber. The door at the end of the corridor stood open. Within was a scene Hastings was to remember, with that strange clarity of dreadful moments, for the rest of his life. The Contessa's bedroom was a great chamber, hung with tapestries. A fire had been lit earlier in the evening, and now smouldered low in the grate. The four-poster bed, with its hangings of damask, stood against the far wall. Its covers were rumpled, as though their occupant had thrown them back hurriedly, and upon the carpet, halfway between the bed and the dressing-table, lay the Contessa Beatrice di Marchetti. She lay upon her side, her white hair loose about her shoulders, her dressing gown of pale blue tangled about her thin frame. Her right hand was outstretched, the fingers curled as though they had been reaching for something. A small ivory-handled handbell lay just beyond her reach. Her eyes were closed, her lips slightly parted, and she did not move. Standing over her, sobbing in great gulping sobs, was Maria, the Contessa's maid, a stout woman of perhaps 50 in a flannel nightdress, her grey hair in a long plait. Madonna mia. I came in to see if she had taken her tonic she had wrung, and she was on the floor. Ah, Dio, doctor. Krause, with admirable promptitude, was on his knees beside the body. He took the wrist, felt at the throat, lifted an eyelid, and after a moment of dreadful silence, shook his head. She is dead. I am sorry. It has happened. Her heart. Vianello had appeared in the doorway, ashen-faced. Dr. Krause hesitated. He bent again to the body, sniffed delicately at the lips, examined the face, which, Hastings now saw, bore a faint bluish tinge about the mouth, and rose slowly. His expression was very grave. It may be the heart. But, gentlemen, I should prefer to wait before signing the certificate. There are certain signs which I do not entirely like. A profound silence fell upon the room. Adelina Russo had now joined them. She stood in the doorway in a Chinese kimono, her face without its paint, looking 10 years older. Cornelia Whitfield came running, Mrs. Beale, a determined shape behind her. They were turned back at the threshold. Poirot, who had not spoken since entering the room, now moved forward. With a delicacy that Hastings had often admired, he crossed the carpet without disturbing a single object. He bent over the Contessa, looked into her face, observed her hands, observed the position of the bell, observed the bedside table, observed the rumpled bedclothes, observed, most particularly, a small drinking glass that stood half empty upon the dressing table. He straightened and turned to Dr. Krause. Doctor? The bluish tinge about the lips, the slight rigidity already of the small muscles of the face. The smell, if I am not in error, of bitter almonds, very faint, mingled with the cordial in this glass. You suspect what I suspect, do you not? Dr. Krause looked at him sharply. You are not, I think, a retired civil servant, sir. My name is Hercule Poirot. I am a detective. The Contessa engaged me after a fashion, for she feared, though she did not know it. Exactly this. Doctor, what do you suspect? Dr. Krause drew a long breath. I suspect cyanide. In some form. The signs are consistent. Cyanide. Vianello's voice was a whisper. But who? How? Poirot raised one small, precise hand. Messieurs, mesdames, the Contessa di Marchetti has not died of her heart. She has been murdered. The police must be summoned. Until they arrive, no one is to leave this palazzo. No one is to enter this room. Everything is to remain precisely as it is. Hastings, you will be so good as to stand at the door. Hastings took up his position. From the canal below, the sound of a single oar broke the silence of the night. Somewhere within the palazzo a clock struck 4, and in the dim, candlelit room, the 8 remaining men of the household stood and stared at one another with the dawning, unspeakable knowledge that one of them was a murderer. Chapter 4. Inspector Bordoni arrives. The Venetian police. When at length they arrived in a black motor scafo that nosed up to the Watergate at 5:30 in the morning, were represented by one Ispettore Giancarlo Bordoni, a man of perhaps 45, short, square, with a face the colour of old leather and an air of unhurried competence. He listened to Dr. Krause's account, to Poirot's discreet introduction of himself, and to Vianello's tearful confirmation, with the calm of a man who has seen a great many bodies in a great many rooms. Signor Poirot, he said when the formalities were complete, I have heard your name. The affair of the bishop's ring, that was you, was it not? Very well. We shall work together, if you will permit it. I do not pretend to your reputation, but this is Venice, and there are certain delicacies. I am at your service, Ispettore. Bean, then let us begin. The Contessa's body was removed with discretion to a small chapel within the palazzo, there to await the arrival of the police surgeon, the glass upon the dressing table, and a small bottle of the Contessa's cordial that stood beside it, were carefully bagged and sealed, by one of Bordoni's men. The bedroom itself was locked, and the key placed in Bordoni's pocket. The household was assembled in the long salon at 7 o'clock. They sat in a ragged half-circle, drawn and pale in the early light that filtered through the high windows. Coffee had been brought. Few touched it. Bordoni stood before them, his hands clasped behind his back. Signore, the Contessa di Marchetti is dead. The cause of death, pending the surgeon's report, appears to be poisoning by cyanide. The poison appears to have been administered through her evening cordial, which she habitually drank at 10:30 before retiring. She was found at 3:30. She must, therefore, have died at some time during the night. There was a small, dreadful sound, a sob, swiftly stifled, from Cornelia Whitfield. I shall now ask each of you to give me an account of your movements from the conclusion of dinner, at, I am told, 9:30, to the discovery of the body. Signor Poirot, with your permission, will assist me. We shall begin with the household, the maids, the cook, the manservant, and then proceed to the guests. I must ask that no one leave the palazzo until I have given permission. The interviews began. They occupied the whole of the morning. Poirot, seated beside Bordoni in the small library, listened with that perfect attention which was at once his courtesy and his weapon. He took no notes. Hastings, sitting in a corner, did so for him. Maria, the maid, gave her account first. The Contessa had retired at 10. Maria had helped her into her dressing gown, brushed her hair, set the small carafe of cordial and the glass upon the dressing table, and left her at 20 minutes past 10. The Contessa had been in low spirits, but had complained of nothing. Maria had then gone to her own room in the servants' wing. At 3:30, she had been woken by the Contessa's bell. Yes, the same little handbell, which the Contessa rang when she required attention in the night. Maria had risen, gone to the bedroom, knocked, received no reply, entered, and found her mistress upon the floor. The cordial, Poirot asked gently. Who prepares it? I do, signore. Always I do. A little wine, a little sugar, a few drops of the tincture from Dr. Krau's. She has taken it for 2 years. And last night? You prepared it as usual? As usual, signore. I poured it into the carafe in the kitchen at 10 o'clock, and I carried it up myself, and I set it upon the table. You did not leave the carafe unattended at any point? Maria hesitated. I set it for a moment upon the table in the corridor, outside the Contessa's room, while I went to fetch a fresh napkin from the linen cupboard. Perhaps 2 minutes, no more. Poirot's eyes met Bordoni's. 2 minutes. A great deal could happen in 2 minutes. The cook, the manservant Stefano, and the undermaid were dismissed after similarly searching questions. None of them had been near the Contessa's room. None had seen anyone in the corridor. All had been in bed by 11. Then it was the turn of the guests. Vianello, the lawyer, had retired at 10:15, read in his room until 11:30, then slept until the disturbance. He had heard nothing. His room was at the eastern end of the corridor, 3 doors from the Contessa's. He had served the Marchetti family for 26 years. Adelina Russo, composed now, dressed in severe black, had stayed in the salon until 11, smoking and talking with Tarrant and with Paolo. She had then gone to her room, which lay upon the floor above. She had heard nothing until the scream. Paolo Marchetti had also remained downstairs until 11. He had then gone to his room, adjacent to Adelina's, on the upper floor, and had read until past midnight. He had been disturbed once, he thought, by a footfall in the corridor, but had assumed it was a servant. At what hour? Asked Poirot. I cannot say with certainty. Perhaps 11:30, perhaps midnight. Edmund Tarrant had retired at 11:30. His room was upon the same floor as the Contessa's, 2 doors from hers. He had heard, he said, nothing whatever. Not even the scream, until he had been wakened by Hastings' footsteps. He slept very deeply, he explained, with the aid of a sleeping draught. He had taken one last night. Cornelia Whitfield, pale, frightened, holding tightly to Mrs. Beale's large hand, had played the piano until shortly after 10, then gone up to her room. Her room lay upon the same floor as the Contessa's, but at the opposite end of the corridor. Mrs. Beale, whose room adjoined hers, had heard her come in at 11:10. The two women had said good night through the connecting door. Cornelia had slept until the alarm. Mrs. Beale, equally pale but considerably more composed, confirmed every word. Dr. Krause had stayed late with the Contessa downstairs after dinner, until perhaps 10:15, discussing her heart medicine. He had then taken his hat and gone, not staying in the palazzo at all, but returning to his own apartments 3 streets away. He had been recalled by telephone at 4 in the morning. Father Domenico had left the palazzo immediately after dinner, at 9, and had walked back to his own house near the church of Santa Maria della Salute. He had retired by 10. Poirot listened. Poirot watched. Poirot, after each interview, made 1 or 2 small, oblique remarks to Bordoni, and pulled very gently at his moustache. At 1:15, when the last of the household had been examined, Bordoni leaned back in his chair and sighed. 8 people, Signor Poirot, 8 people, each with the opportunity, or so it would seem, to add poison to the cordial during those 2 minutes in the corridor, and we have 8 stories, each of which may be true. Or none of which may be true, said Poirot softly. Let us not forget that, Ispetor. Let us not forget that at all. Chapter 5. The empty safe. It was Stefano, the manservant, who made the discovery, at 3 in the afternoon, the household having dispersed to their rooms in that strange, listless lull which follows interrogation. He came into the library, where Poirot, Hastings, and Bordoni were comparing notes. His face was the colour of paper. Signori, the safe, the small safe in the Contessa's dressing-room. It stands open. It is empty. They went at once. The Contessa's dressing-room adjoined her bedroom. The police seal upon the bedroom door had not been broken, but the dressing-room had its own corridor entrance, which had not. In the morning's confusion been sealed. Within stood the safe, a heavy iron contraption set into the wall behind a hinged painting. The painting was swung back. The safe door was ajar. The interior, except for a few papers, was bare. The emerald? Bordoni demanded. Stefano nodded miserably. The Marchetti emerald, other jewels also, the pearl earrings, the diamond stomacher, all gone. Madonna, all gone. Poirot examined the safe with great care. There was no sign of force. The lock had not been picked, nor the door damaged. It has been opened with the key, or with the combination. Who knew either? The Contessa, said Stefano, and Signor Vianello, the avvocato. He has the duplicate for the legal papers. And the Contessa's key, where was it kept? Upon her person, Signore, on a chain about her neck. Always, they returned with grim purpose to the chapel where the Contessa lay. Dr. Crow, summoned, examined her again. Upon her neck was the chain. Upon the chain, nothing. The key was gone. Poirot stood looking down at the small, still face of the murdered woman for a long moment. So, he said quietly, it is robbery as well then, or it is meant to appear so. Bordoni said, Vianello has the duplicate key. We must speak to him at once. But Vianello, summoned, produced his key, heavy, ornate, plainly the duplicate of the chain key, from a leather wallet within his breast pocket. He had not, he said, touched the safe in months. He kept the key only because the late Count had insisted, against the day when the Contessa might be incapacitated, and the combination. I do not know it, Ispetor, only the Contessa knew it. Poirot looked thoughtful. A safe of this sort, monsieur. It requires both key and combination? Yes, both. Then the thief had the key, taken, presumably, from the Contessa's body in the night, after the murder, and also knew the combination. Tell me, Signor Vianello, did the Contessa ever speak the combination aloud? In your presence? Vianello's face contracted. Once. Perhaps 2 years ago. We were doing the inventory of the safe for the insurance. Yes, she said, the numbers aloud as she turned the dial. I told her at the time that it was imprudent. Who was present? I cannot remember exactly. Myself, certainly. Maria the maid, I believe. Possibly Stefano. Possibly Paolo. He was in the palazzo that afternoon. And Signor Tarrant? Tarrant was not here 2 years ago. He has been a guest only since the spring. Signora Russo? Vianello hesitated. She? Yes, she may have been. She paints, you know. She sometimes comes to paint a view from one of the upper windows. She is an old friend of the family. Poirot nodded. I see. So the combination at one moment was known to perhaps 5 persons besides the Contessa. It is possible, and there could be others. Stefano may have told the cook. Maria may have mentioned it in confidence to her sister. Such things travel. It is the nature of secrets. Hastings ventured. But surely, if it were ordinary robbery, the thief might have used the key alone, having forced the combination at leisure. He need not necessarily have known it in advance. Poirot turned to him with a small smile. Mon ami, you are wise. The thief indeed had all night. He had only to take the key from the Contessa's body, walk through to the dressing room, and work upon the dial. Or, alternatively, he had only to compel the Contessa herself to give him the combination. You think she was tortured? Hastings was appalled. No, she died too quickly for that. She was poisoned, and the cordial was certain. But consider, my friend, if the Contessa was poisoned at 10:30 and died, let us say, by midnight, and was not discovered until 3:30, there was time. 3.5 hours. Time to take the key, time to open the safe, time to empty it, time even to leave the palazzo. Bordoni shook his head. No one left, signore. We have already established it. The water gate was bolted from the inside at midnight by Stefano. The land door upon the calle was bolted by Maria at the same hour. They were unbolted again by Stefano this morning at 6. No one came in. No one went out. Then, said Poirot, the jewels are still within the palazzo, somewhere. A look, a swift, sharp, illuminating look, passed between him and Bordoni. The Ispator nodded. A search, he said, top to bottom, every room, every cupboard, every guest, every servant, their persons, their luggage. Today, Poirot agreed, but with care, Ispator. Great care. For if there is one thing I begin to suspect, it is that we are dealing with a person of considerable intelligence, and such a person does not leave the jewels in his sock drawer. Chapter 6. A painter, a cigarette, and a lay. The search occupied the remainder of the afternoon and the better part of the evening. Bordoni's officers, working with the patient thoroughness of men who had done such work many times before, examined every room of the palazzo from the cellars, which extended below the waterline, and smelt powerfully of damp brick, to the attics, which were full of broken furniture and the dust of generations. They searched cupboards, chests, the lining of curtains, the cisterns of water closets, the false bottoms of dressing cases. They examined every garment in every wardrobe. They found nothing. Not a pearl, not a stone, not so much as a setting. Either, said Bordoni at 9:30 that evening, slumping into a chair in the library. The jewels have been put in some place so cunning that we have not yet seen it. Or they have already left the palazzo. Impossible to leave, Poirot reminded him, unless thrown into the canal. Bordoni sat upright. Madre di Dio, Signor Poirot. If they have been thrown into the canal, they are gone forever. The mud of the Grand Canal does not give up its dead. Then let us hope they have not been thrown. There was a pause. Then Hastings, who had been silent in the corner, spoke. Poirot, that woman, the painter, Adelina Russo. There was something, I don't know how to put it, but at lunch today she said something curious to me. She said she had been sketching late in the night from the balcony of the music room, that she sometimes did so when she could not sleep, by moonlight. Poirot turned his full attention upon Hastings. She said this freely? Quite freely. She said the canal at night was very beautiful. And what hour did she give? From midnight, she said, until perhaps 2 a.m. Poirot leaned slowly back in his chair. But this morning, before the Ispator, She said she had retired at 11 and slept until the scream. Exactly. A slow smile spread across Poirot's small face. Hastings, this is excellent. We shall speak to Signora Russo at once. She was sent for, and came, composed still in her severe black, a cigarette burning between her long fingers. She seated herself in the chair indicated, and regarded Poirot with eyes in which there was a flicker of wariness. "Signora Russo," he began gently, "I wish to ask you again about your movements last night. You told the Ispator that you went to your room at 11 and did not leave it until the alarm." "I did. And yet, to my friend Captain Hastings, at luncheon today, you said that you had been sketching upon the balcony of the music room from midnight until 2. There was the smallest possible pause. Then she laughed, a short, harsh laugh. "Hastings, you are a beast." "Yes, yes, Signor Poirot, I lied to the Ispator. I admit it. I did not wish to involve myself. I did go down to the music room. The balcony there looks over the canal. It is the only good view from this floor. I went down at perhaps 11:30. I took my sketchbook and a candle. I sketched for over an hour. And you saw nothing? Heard nothing?" She drew upon her cigarette and exhaled slowly. "I saw one thing I did not wish to say, but I shall say it now, because I see it is no use pretending. Please. At, I think, midnight, I heard a step in the corridor outside the music room, a man's step. I had left the door of the music room slightly open, for air. I looked. I saw a man pass the doorway, going in the direction of the Contessa's apartments." "Who?" "Edmund Tarrant." The name fell into the room like a stone into water. Poirot said very quietly, "You are certain?" "I am certain. He passed within 4 feet of me. He wore his dressing gown, the dark red one. He did not see me. I stood back behind the door. He went down the corridor and out of sight." "Did you see him return?" "Yes. About 20 minutes later. He came back the way he had gone. He looked, I thought, satisfied." "Satisfied," Poirot echoed. "What an interesting word, Signora. And why did you not tell this to the Ispator?" Adelina Russo's lips tightened. "Because, Signor Poirot, I do not particularly love the police. And because, I admit it freely, I do not entirely love Edmund Tarrant either. But I do not wish to be the instrument of his hanging if I am mistaken. He is. He is the sort of man one wishes to be sure about before one accuses." "And what is your opinion of him, Signora?" She crushed out her cigarette. "He is a clever scoundrel. He has been making love to the little American girl. He has been making love also, I think, to her fortune. He has been very attentive to the Contessa. He has admired the Marchetti emerald in my hearing on 3 separate occasions, and he is the sort of man, yes, who would do such a thing if he could see his way to do it cleanly. So there, I have said it. Make of it what you will." When she had gone, Bordoni let out a long breath. "Signor Poirot, we have him. Tarrant, in the Contessa's corridor, at midnight, 20 minutes, out again. It is suggestive, Ispator. It is more than suggestive. And yet. Poirot was silent for a moment. He twisted one tip of his moustache with infinite care. "And yet, my friend, the Signora Russo has confessed to 2 lies in the space of 12 hours. The first to you, the second, perhaps. To me, we must be careful, very careful. A liar who admits one lie is sometimes only pressing the next more firmly into our hands." Chapter 7, The Englishman's story. Edmund Tarrant, summoned at 10 o'clock that night, received the news of the accusation against him with admirable composure. He sat in the library opposite Bordoni and Poirot, lit a cigarette with steady hands, and crossed one well-creased trouser leg over the other. "Signora Russo says she saw me in the corridor at midnight," he repeated. "Yes, that is perfectly true. I did not mention it this morning because, frankly, gentlemen, it did not seem material. I had no idea at that hour that the Contessa was being murdered." Bordoni's eyebrows rose. "You admit, Signor Tarrant, that you were in the corridor leading to the Contessa's apartments at midnight?" "I admit it freely. I went to her sitting room, which adjoins her bedroom, you will recall, by a connecting door. for a particular purpose. I shall tell you what it was, since I see I must." He drew a slow breath. There was, Hastings thought, no flicker of fear in him, only a kind of cool, calculating regret. Earlier in the evening, during dinner, in fact, the Contessa had asked me, in a private moment as we passed in the corridor before the meal, whether I would be so good as to come to her sitting room after the others had retired. She wished to consult me, she said, about a particular antique, a small bronze of a horse, late Roman, that she had inherited from her father and was thinking of selling. She did not wish Signor Vianello, her lawyer, to know, for Vianello, she felt, would object to the sale on family grounds. She asked me to come at midnight, when the household would be quiet. And you went. I went. I tapped at the sitting-room door. There was no answer. I tapped again. Still no answer. And here perhaps I behaved badly. I tried the handle. The door was unlocked. I went in. And then the sitting-room was dark. A single lamp burned on the writing table. The bronze of the horse stood upon a shelf. The connecting door to the Contessa's bedroom was closed. I called softly. There was no reply. I assumed, naturally, that she had fallen asleep, or had forgotten, or had thought better of the consultation. I waited perhaps 5 minutes. Then I left. "You did not enter the bedroom?" "Certainly not." "You did not look at the bronze?" I glanced at it. It is a fine piece. Hadrianic, I should say. Poirot, who had been listening with his head a little to one side, now spoke for the first time. "Signor Tarrant, you say that the Contessa asked you, during a private moment in the corridor before dinner, to come to her sitting-room. May I ask, was anyone within sight when this conversation took place?" "I do not think so. We were alone. And the conversation was, of course, in English." "It was in English. The Contessa spoke English with me always. Her own was excellent. Very good. Tell me, monsieur, did you, while in the sitting-room, hear any sound at all from the bedroom beyond?" Tarrant considered. "No, not a sound, but the door is thick." "And when you left the sitting-room, was the corridor empty?" "Quite empty. Or so I thought." "Signora Russo says you looked satisfied as you returned." Tarrant smiled, a thin professional smile. "Signora Russo is a painter. Painters interpret. I felt, in fact, mildly irritated at having been kept waiting, and then disappointed. If I looked satisfied, it must have been because I was looking forward to my bed." Bordoni leaned forward. "Signor Tarrant, the Marchetti emerald has been stolen from the safe in the Contessa's dressing-room. Did you, while in the sitting-room, see or hear anything that might suggest the presence of another person within the apartments?" "Nothing whatever." "The dressing-room, to which the sitting-room is also connected, I am told, by a second door, was that door open or closed?" Tarrant paused. He frowned slightly as though trying to remember. "Closed. Yes, I am sure of it. Closed." The interview continued for another quarter of an hour. Tarrant gave his consent to a personal search. The search produced nothing. His luggage had already been searched. Bordoni, at length, allowed him to retire, with the caution that he was not to leave the palazzo upon any account. When the door had closed behind him, Bordoni and Poirot looked at one another. "Well, Signor Poirot, well, Ispator, he tells, as he says, a perfectly clean story. He had, by his own account, a reason to be in the corridor. He had, by his own account, a reason to be in the sitting-room. He saw nothing, he heard nothing, he took nothing. It is a story that fits the facts admirably." "Too admirably?" "Perhaps, perhaps not. But there is one detail, Ispator, which interests me very much." "Which?" "He says the dressing-room door was closed." "Yet how does he know?" "He says he did not approach it. He says he glanced only at the bronze and waited." "Why, then, did his eye fall, sufficiently to fix the memory, upon the door to the dressing-room?" Bordoni considered. "Perhaps it is simply that he is observant. Perhaps. Or perhaps he wishes us very particularly to know that the dressing-room door was closed. And that, Ispator, is interesting in either case." Hastings, in his corner, watched his friend and felt that familiar tightening of the air which always preceded. sometimes by days, sometimes by hours, the great clearing of fog that was Poirot's hallmark. The case was beginning, Hastings thought, to take its shape. He did not yet, however, see that shape. He saw only the shadows of it, a great curving arc of suggestion, with the Englishman Tarrant at its centre, and yet, with some dim and untouched figure beyond. Chapter 8. The American Heiress. The following morning brought a thin sun and the police surgeon's report. The Contessa had died, as Dr. Krauser had suspected, of cyanide poisoning administered in the cordial. Death had supervened, the surgeon estimated, within 10 to 15 minutes of ingestion. Time of death, between 10:30 and 11:15 the previous evening. This last fact, when Bordoni read it aloud in the library, caused Poirot's eyebrows to lift very slightly. Between 10:30 and 11:15. Yes, the surgeon is firm upon it. Then Ispetor, the Contessa, was already dead when Tarrant entered the sitting room at midnight. That is so. And the theft of the jewels, which you will recall, required key, combination, and time, could only have been effected after death. That also is so. Poirot fell into a long silence. Hastings, watching him, recognised the look, the small inward gathering of attention, like a man drawing in the strands of a net. "Ispetor," he said at last, "I should very much like to speak with Miss Whitfield, alone if possible, and without Mrs. Beale." Bordoni nodded, and the arrangement was made. Cornelia Whitfield was prevailed upon to come to the small morning room overlooking the Rio at the side of the palazzo, while Mrs. Beale, protesting, was kept downstairs by Bordoni upon the pretext of a separate interview. Cornelia entered nervously. She was very young, Hastings thought, younger than her 23 years, and her prettiness had a fragile quality this morning, as of porcelain that had been recently dropped. She sat upon the edge of a chair and folded her hands in her lap. "Mademoiselle," said Poirot, with that particular gentleness he reserved for the young and the frightened, "you must not be alarmed. I wish only to ask you one or two small things. You are not under any suspicion. I give you my word." "Thank you, Mr. Poirot." "Mademoiselle, you are, I believe, acquainted with Mr. Edmund Tarrant?" A flush rose in her cheeks. Yes, of course. I have met him at the Contessa's table several times." "Only at the Contessa's table?" Her flush deepened. He has called once or twice in the afternoons to take Mrs. Beale and me, to view the churches." "I see. And you find him agreeable company?" "He is. Very kind, mademoiselle." Poirot's voice was very gentle indeed. "Has Mr. Tarrant made you an offer of marriage?" The girl's hands twisted in her lap. For a moment Hastings thought she would burst into tears. Then she said, very low, "Yes. When?" 3 days ago, in a gondola, coming back from San Giorgio." "And you accepted?" I have not given him an answer. Mrs. Beale would be very angry. My father in Boston would be very angry. Mr. Tarrant. He has not, I think, the position they would wish for me. And yet," she lifted her chin a little, "and yet, Mr. Poirot, he is the only person here who has ever spoken to me as though I were a person, and not a bank account." "I understand, mademoiselle. Tell me, did anyone else in this house know of his offer?" I think the Contessa knew. I told her 2 days ago. In the garden. She was very kind. She said I should take my time, but that she thought Mr. Tarrant was perhaps not what he seemed." "Ah." Poirot leaned forward. "She used those words?" "Yes. Not perhaps what he seems. She said she would make some inquiries through Signor Vaianello before I gave my answer." "And the Contessa told you, perhaps, when she would have these inquiries? Results, she said, by the end of this week." Poirot leaned back. He exchanged the briefest of glances with Hastings. "One last question, mademoiselle. On the night of the murder, between the hours of 10 and 11:30, were you in your room?" "Yes. Mrs. Beale will tell you. We said good night through the door at 11:10 as she told you. But before that, between 10 and 11, I was in my room reading. Mrs. Beale was in hers." You heard no sound from the corridor? No, except— She hesitated. Except, mademoiselle. Except, I think, at about 11:15, I heard the Contessa's bell. Both Poirot and Hastings went very still. You heard her handbell, mademoiselle? The little ivory one? Yes. A very faint tinkle. Once. Then nothing. I thought she had called Maria for some small thing. And from the corridor, did you hear footsteps? I am not sure. Perhaps. A soft step. But I was reading. I was not paying close attention. When she had been dismissed, with 1,000 reassurances from Poirot that her confidence would not be betrayed to Mrs. Beale, Poirot remained quite still in his chair for some minutes. Hastings, mon ami, do you see it now? I think I see, that Tarrant had a particularly strong motive. The Contessa was making inquiries about him. If she discovered something to his discredit, she would warn the girl. The girl would refuse him. He would lose the fortune. So, he silenced her before the inquiries were complete. That is the motive, yes. And the means, the cordial. And the opportunity, the 2 minutes in the corridor when Maria left the carafe unattended. Tarrant could have come from his room, which is upon the same floor, slipped the poison into the carafe in those 2 minutes. But the bell, Poirot, the bell at 11:15. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Yes, my friend, the bell. It is the bell that I begin to think will hang someone, but not, perhaps, the person you suppose. Chapter 9. A letter from Milan that afternoon. 2 things occurred, each in its way of considerable importance. The first was the arrival, by the morning post from Milan, of a thick envelope addressed to the late Contessa di Marchetti, in the hand of Signor Vianello himself. Vianello, when shown it, frowned. It is the report I commissioned from the Banca Commerciale upon Mr. Tarrant. The Contessa had asked me to make discreet inquiries into his financial standing. I sent the letter 10 days ago. The reply has come. Open it, said Bordoni. Vianello opened it. He read in silence, his lean face growing graver. At length he passed the sheet across the table. Mr. Edmund Tarrant, he said, is a bankrupt. Twice. Under one name in London in 1929, under another in Paris in 1933. The present antique business is a small affair with debts of some 40,000 lire. He has, in addition, been the subject of 2 civil suits for the misrepresentation of forgeries as genuine. He was not prosecuted criminally, only because the complainants withdrew. He is, in short, a confidence trickster of some experience. Bordoni slapped the table. There, what more do we need? A confession, said Poirot. Or, failing that, proof that he poisoned the cordial. The motive is there, the character is there, but the means and the moment, these we must still establish beyond all doubt. The second event of the afternoon was the discovery, by one of Bordoni's officers, of a small object in the most unexpected of places. The officer, a young man named Conti, with a particularly keen eye, had been re-examining the Contessa's bedroom, which had now been opened to allow the surgeon's final inspection. He noticed, beside the bed, between the bed frame and the wall, a tiny scrap of fabric, perhaps half an inch long, the colour of dark red silk, caught upon a splinter of wood. He brought it to Bordoni and Poirot. It is silk, said Bordoni, holding it up to the light. Dark red, of fine quality. Poirot took it between thumb and finger, and examined it with infinite care. Yes, silk. And, observe, a small irregular weave, a type used in dressing gowns of a certain pattern. Hastings drew in his breath. Tarrant's dressing gown is dark red silk. It is, mon ami. It is. The implication was immediate. If a scrap of Tarrant's dressing gown had been torn off beside the Contessa's bed, and Tarrant, by his own account, had not entered the bedroom, then Tarrant was a liar at the simplest and most damaging point. This is enough, said Bordoni. This, taken with the report and the corridor sighting and the motive. Signor Poirot, I propose to arrest him. Poirot held up his hand. One moment, Inspettor. One moment, I beg you. Let me first examine certain other articles in the palazzo. Let me speak privately with Stefano and with Maria. Give me until tomorrow at noon. If by then I have not satisfied myself, you shall make your arrest." Bordoni, with the air of a man who, despite himself, had come to trust Poirot's instincts, agreed. Poirot then spent a curious afternoon. He was observed by Hastings to inspect, in the linen cupboard upon the upper floor, every dressing gown belonging to every gentleman in the house. He spent a quarter of an hour in the music room, examining the balcony from which Adelina Rousseau had, by her own confession, sketched the canal. He visited the kitchen and questioned the cook length about the carafe, the corks, and the wine cellar. He climbed to the attic and stood for some time looking down at the canal through a small dormer window. At 5 o'clock he asked Hastings to accompany him for a stroll. They left the palazzo by the calle door and walked very slowly along the narrow alley into the Campo San Stefano, and around to a small osteria where Poirot ordered a glass of wine and a plate of small fried fish. "Hastings," he said when they were seated, "I will tell you what I know. I know that the Contessa was poisoned in her cordial, between 10:30 and 11:15. I know that her bell was heard once, faintly, at 11:15. I know that Maria left the carafe in the corridor for 2 minutes. I know that the safe was opened by someone who possessed both key and combination. I know that the jewels are still in the palazzo, for none could leave. I know that Signor Vianello had a duplicate key. I know that Tarrant lied about not entering the bedroom, for there is the scrap of his dressing gown beside the bed. I know that Tarrant is a scoundrel. And I know that Signora Rousseau lied to the police, and then perhaps lied to me. I know that Paolo Marchetti stands to inherit a great fortune. I know that Dr. Krauser prescribed the cordial. I know that Father Domenico left the palazzo at 9. I know that Mrs. Beale watches over Cornelia Whitfield like a dragon. I know that Cornelia received a proposal of marriage 3 days ago. That is a great deal. It is, and it is nothing. Because, Hastings, there is one fact among these which is the wrong shape, one fact which does not fit, one fact which I have known from the beginning, and to which my little grey cells have been returning again and again like a tongue to an aching tooth." "Which fact?" Poirot smiled. "Ah, that, my friend, I shall not yet tell you, but I shall tell you tomorrow morning, and tomorrow afternoon I shall tell everyone." He paid for the wine. They walked back to the palazzo through the soft purple twilight of a Venetian autumn evening. The bells of the city tolled the Angelus. Somewhere over the rooftops a gull cried, and as they crossed the threshold of the Palazzo Marchetti, Poirot paused and laid his hand for a moment on Hastings' arm. "Tomorrow, mon ami, tomorrow we shall set the trap, and the murderer, I assure you, will walk into it." Chapter 10. The bell that should not have rung. Poirot was up at 6 the following morning. Hastings, finding him already dressed and seated in the breakfast room with a cup of chocolate, was greeted with a small, triumphant smile. "Good morning, mon ami. I have, I think, the answer. All of it, all of it. But before I show you the picture, let me first show you the small piece which made me see it." He drew from his pocket the little ivory-handled handbell which had lain beside the Contessa's body. Bordoni had given it into his keeping the previous evening. Poirot held it up. "Hastings, Cornelia Whitfield heard this bell at 11:15. Yes, Maria left the Contessa at 10:20. Cornelia heard the bell at 11:15. That is, 25 minutes later. According to the surgeon, the Contessa died within 10 to 15 minutes of swallowing the cyanide. Therefore, if she swallowed the cyanide shortly after retiring, say at 10:30, she would have died by 11:15, which is, you observe, the time at which the bell rang. So she rang it as she felt herself ill to summon Maria. That was indeed my first thought. But now consider, my friend. The bell was found upon the floor, just beyond her outstretched hand. That is consistent with her having held it, rung it, and dropped it as she fell. Exactly, but it is also consistent, Hastings, with someone else having rung it, and dropped it, beside her body. Why on earth would the murderer ring her bell? Because, mon ami, the bell, at 11:15, establishes that the Contessa was still alive at 11:15. It establishes that she died after that moment. It throws the time of death forward. Perhaps to 11, perhaps to 11:30. It widens the window in which a poisoner might have acted. It is, I say it carefully, an alibi. Hastings frowned. An alibi for whom? For anyone who can place himself elsewhere at 11:15. For Tarrant, who can show he was in his room at that hour. For Paolo Marchetti, upstairs reading. For Adelina Russo, in her room, or so she first said. For all of them, but, most particularly, for the one person who was demonstrably alone with the cordial before it went into the Contessa's room. Maria? But Maria is... Poirot waved his hand. No. Not Maria. Think, Hastings. The cordial is prepared by Maria in the kitchen at 10. She carries it up. She sets it down in the corridor for 2 minutes. She enters the Contessa's bedroom with it, at let us say 10:15, and pours it into the glass beside the bed. She helps the Contessa with her dressing gown, brushes her hair, leaves at 10:20. The Contessa, alone, drinks the cordial, and dies within 10 to 15 minutes. So the poison was put in during those 2 minutes in the corridor. That is what we have all assumed. But there is another possibility, Hastings. The poison could have been put into the cordial earlier. Much earlier. In the kitchen, in the carafe, or in the bottle of cordial from which Maria pours. By the only person who handles the cordial at every stage. The person who supplies the very tincture from which it is mixed. The person who prescribed it in the first place. Hastings stared. Dr. Krause? Dr. Krause, who left the palazzo at 10:15 and went home. Who could not, by any stretch of the imagination, have been in the corridor at the moment of poisoning, who has, in short, an unimpeachable alibi for the only 2 minutes that matter, provided the bell is taken to establish that the poisoning happened after 10:30. But Poirot, how would Krause have known the cordial would not be drunk earlier by someone else, or thrown out, or... It is a cordial prepared every evening, Hastings, from a tincture which the good doctor himself supplies. He has only to put cyanide into the tincture itself. In such quantity, perhaps, that even a few drops are fatal, or, more delicately, into the bottle of cordial from which Maria pours. He could do this any time he visits the house. He visits frequently. He visited the previous afternoon. But the motive... Why would Krause want to kill the Contessa? She was his patient. She paid him. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Ah, the motive. That, Hastings, is the matter which most occupied me yesterday, and I think I have it. But there are still gaps in my picture. There is above all the question of the jewels. Krause did not steal the jewels. He could not have done so. He was 3 streets away when they were taken. Then someone else took the jewels. Precisely. And that is the second crime, Hastings, and the second criminal. For we have here, I am now convinced, not one wrongdoer but 2. 2 persons working, perhaps without each other's knowledge, toward different ends, and one using the other's act as a screen. Hastings was silent. Outside the breakfast-room window, the canal lapped softly at the steps of the palazzo. A barge passed, piled with vegetables, the bargeman's voice rising in a snatch of song. This afternoon, Hastings, I shall ask Bordoni to gather everyone in the great salon. I shall ask each person certain questions, and then, at last, I shall give them all the answer. And the murderer, will he confess? Poirot smiled, almost sadly. Murderers, in my experience, Hastings, confess only when they are no longer permitted to do anything else. We shall see. We shall see. Chapter 11. The Gathering in the Great Salon. At 4 o'clock that afternoon they were assembled, every one of them, in the long salon overlooking the Grand Canal. The autumn light, soft and golden, fell through the high windows upon the brocaded chairs, the faded Persian carpet, the great Murano chandelier that hung silent above their heads. A fire burned in the marble hearth. Outside, the bell of San Marco struck the hour. The Contessa, of course, was not there, but it seemed to Hastings, looking about the room, that her absence was the most present thing in it. A quiet, watchful absence, as though she sat somewhere just out of sight, waiting to hear what would be said. Vianello sat to one side, his lean face set. Adelina Russo, again in vivid green, lit a cigarette with hands that were just perceptibly unsteady. Paolo Marchetti slouched in his chair. Edmund Tarrant sat with one ankle resting on the opposite knee, the picture of careless ease. Cornelia Whitfield clasped her hands in her lap. Mrs. Beale, a dark monument beside her, Father Domenico, summoned for the occasion, sat with his eyes closed, telling beads. Dr. Emil Krause was the last to enter, his beard freshly combed, his manner professional and grave. Bordoni stood by the door. Two of his uniformed men stood quietly in the corridor beyond. Poirot rose. He did not raise his voice. He never needed to. Mesdames, Messieurs, 3 nights ago in this palazzo, the Contessa Beatrice di Marchetti was poisoned in her bed. Her jewels were taken from her safe. The two events have until now appeared to be one crime. I shall demonstrate to you this afternoon that they are two, committed by 2 different persons, and I shall name them both. A small electric current seemed to pass round the room. No one spoke. Let us begin with the jewels. The thief, for I shall not yet call him the murderer, though he is, as you shall see, a thief, required 3 things: the key of the safe, the combination of the safe, and time alone within the Contessa's apartments. The key was taken from the chain about her dead neck. The combination was known to several persons. Time was provided by the murder. He paused. His small eyes travelled the room, resting nowhere. The thief is in this room. He came to the Contessa's apartments at midnight, when she had been dead some hour and a half. He let himself in. He took the key. He opened the safe. He took the jewels. He left. And in his egress, for the dead, alas, do not always lie tidily, he caught the hem of his dressing gown upon a splinter beside the bed, and tore from it a small piece of red silk, which officer Conti found and brought to me. Tarrant did not move, but the colour very slowly was leaving his face. Mr. Edmund Tarrant, you went to the Contessa's apartments at midnight. You have admitted it. You went, you said, because she had asked you to consult upon a bronze. You found the sitting room empty, the bedroom door closed. You waited, you left. That is what you said. It is not, however, what you did. You entered the bedroom. You found her dead. You took the key from her neck. You opened the safe. You took the jewels. Tarrant's lips were white now, but he said with a dreadful little smile, "You will not prove a word of it." "On the contrary, monsieur, the piece of silk proves it. Your dressing gown, examined with your permission yesterday by the Ispettora, bears a torn corner of precisely the matching pattern. Furthermore, monsieur, when I have finished speaking of the murder, I propose to require of you the production of the jewels. They are still within the palazzo. I have, I believe, a tolerably good idea where." Tarrant's eyes flicked once, involuntarily, toward the great chandelier above their heads. It was the smallest of movements, but Poirot caught it, and Hastings caught Poirot's catching it, and Bordoni, quick man, caught it also. "The chandelier," said Poirot pleasantly, "old, with many ornaments of Murano glass, large hollow drops, some of them, reached easily from the top of a chair set upon the table beneath. Ingenious, monsieur. We shall of course examine it." Tarrant said nothing. His hands gripped the arms of his chair. But now, to the more terrible matter, the murder itself. Poirot turned a quarter of the way round the circle of faces. The Contessa di Marchetti was killed by cyanide in her evening cordial. The cordial was prepared by Maria, the maid, in the kitchen at 10 o'clock. It was carried upstairs and set briefly in the corridor. It was poured into the glass upon the dressing table, and it was drunk by the Contessa, alone, shortly after she had been left at 10:20. She rang her bell, or so it would appear, at 11:15. He paused. That bell, mesdames and messieurs, is the linchpin of the whole crime. For if the Contessa rang it, then she was alive at 11:15, and if she was alive at 11:15, The cyanide must have been administered between, let us say, 20 past 10 and 20 to 11. And in that window, in that small, narrow window, only the persons within the palazzo, with access to the corridor where the carafe stood unattended for 2 minutes, could have committed the crime, which excludes, most conspicuously, anyone who had already left the palazzo earlier in the evening. He paused again. Heads were beginning to turn, very slightly. In particular, it excludes the one person who handled the very tincture from which the cordial was prepared, the person who could, quite easily, have introduced cyanide into that tincture, or into the bottle of cordial itself, hours or even days before the murder, knowing that the Contessa took the cordial nightly and would inevitably swallow the dose. The person whom no investigator would suspect, because at the moment of the poisoning he had a perfect alibi. He was in his apartments 3 streets away. He was, in fact, the very person who would later declare the cause of death and lend his medical authority to the investigation. The room held its breath. Dr. Krause. The doctor's beard quivered very slightly. His face did not otherwise change. He sat, as he had sat from the beginning, his hands resting calmly upon his knees. "I beg your pardon, Signor Poirot. I named you, monsieur, and I shall, if you will permit me, explain how I came to do so." Chapter 12, The Doctor's Confession, The Bell, said Poirot, is the heart of the matter. Cornelia Whitfield heard the bell at 11:15. It was a single, faint tinkle. No footsteps in the corridor followed it. Maria did not respond. She had retired, and her room is too far away to hear. The bell, in short, was rung once into emptiness. "That is possible," said Krause slowly. "She may have rung and then collapsed before anyone could come." "Possible, monsieur. But consider, if a woman feels herself dying of poison, she does not ring a small handbell once, and then drop it neatly 2 feet from her hand. She rings it repeatedly, she seizes it, she shakes it, or, if very weak, she lets it fall from her grasp at once. The position of the bell, just beyond her hand, is unnatural. It is, as we say in English, placed. And the bell, said Bordoni grimly, was the only thing that placed the time of death after Krause had left the palazzo. Precisely. Without the bell, if the Contessa had been found in her bed, dead, with the empty glass beside her, the surgeon could have placed the time of death anywhere between, perhaps, 10:15 and 1 in the morning. The window would have been wide enough to include Krause's last visit to the palazzo. With the bell, however, and with Mademoiselle Whitfield's testimony, the window narrows. The doctor is safely excluded. Krause's expression had not changed, but a small bead of perspiration had appeared upon his temple. "But the bell was rung," Poirot continued, by someone who entered the bedroom after the Contessa was dead, who found the body, who saw the carafe and the empty glass, who at once understood, and who rang the bell once, and dropped it beside her hand to shift the time of death and to render himself, the doctor, perfectly safe. Hastings looked suddenly at Tarrant. So did Bordoni. "Tarrant," said Poirot quietly, entered the bedroom at midnight. He found the Contessa dead. He had come to steal the jewels. He had indeed gone to the bedroom precisely because the open invitation to the sitting room provided his cover. He had been planning the theft for weeks. He found his task already partly done. The lady whose key he needed was already past objection. He took the key, opened the safe, took the jewels. Poirot's voice grew softer. "But before he left, monsieur, you did something else. You rang the bell. You dropped it beside her hand. Why? Because, and here is the elegance of the thing, you also knew. You knew, monsieur, that Dr. Krause had killed her. Or, at the very least, you suspected. You had reason to believe." Tarrant said nothing. "How did you know?" "Because I think you and Dr. Krause were acquainted. You are both, in your own ways, men with, shall we say, fluid relationships to other people's property. I have wired to the Sûreté in Paris and to Scotland Yard. There exists, between you, a previous association. a small matter of forged antiquities in Vienna in 1932, in which a certain Dr. K was involved as appraiser. I think you knew each other before either of you came to Venice. I think you may even, Monsieur Tarrant, have given Dr. Krause the idea, innocently or otherwise, that the Contessa's death would be convenient to him. Krause stirred at last. Signor Poirot, these are speculations. They are speculations, monsieur, which I propose to verify in the coming days. The wires from Vienna will tell us all. For now, I confine myself to the events of 3 nights ago. He turned again to Tarrant. You rang the bell, monsieur, because you wished to shift the time of death and thereby protect Dr. Krause, not from any tenderness toward him, but because you knew that the moment Krause was suspected, all eyes would turn from the locked room mystery of the corridor and the carafe, that the investigation would shift to medical alibis. That, in the confusion, you might escape unobserved with the jewels, and perhaps you held a slight insurance. If Krause were arrested for the murder, you, the thief, might bargain. You might offer to be witness against him. You might escape with a lighter penalty. Tarrant let out at last a small, thin laugh. You credit me, Signor Poirot, with more cleverness than I possess. On the contrary, monsieur, I credit you with exactly the cleverness you possess, which is considerable, but not, as it happens, quite sufficient. Poirot returned his attention to Krause. Doctor, the motive. Why does a respected physician murder his elderly patient? I asked myself this question often. The Contessa paid you well. She trusted you. Her death cost you a patient. Where, then, was the gain? Krause was silent. It lay, I believe, in her will. Signor Vianello, perhaps you would tell us. To whom did the Contessa leave her fortune? Vianello cleared his throat. Her fortune passes, in the main, to her nephew, Signor Paolo Marchetti, who inherits the palazzo and the bulk of the estate. There are, however, several substantial bequests. To Maria, to Stefano, to the Church of Santa Maria, and to a charitable foundation recently endowed by the Contessa under her own name for the support of indigent Austrian families in Venice. And who, Signor Vianello, is the principal trustee of this foundation? Dr. Emile Krause. A small silence. Then Vianello continued, almost reluctantly. The foundation was endowed last year with 300,000 lire in trust. There has, I confess, been some irregularity in its administration. I had been pressing the Contessa to review the accounts. She had agreed. The review was to begin next week. Poirot inclined his head. Then there is your motive, monsieur le docteur. The trust was being looted. The Contessa had agreed to investigate. Within a week or two, perhaps within days, your malversation would have been exposed. Disgrace, prison, ruin, unless the Contessa did not live to begin her review. The cyanide, doctor, was added to the bottle of cordial during your visit on the afternoon before the murder. You knew she would drink it. That evening. You knew the timing would be perfect, and you trusted to the simple fact that no medical man examines his own prescription for the presence of the very poisons no one would expect. Krause did not speak. His face, very slowly, had gone the colour of his beard. Father Domenico, in the corner, opened his eyes and crossed himself. Krause said at last, in a voice that was almost a whisper, It was meant to be quick. She was old. She was failing. She would not have lived another year. That is not for you to decide, monsieur. No, it is not. Bordoni had moved already. The 2 officers from the corridor came quietly into the room. Krause rose without resistance and held out his wrists. Tarrant, white-faced, was likewise taken into custody. The chandelier was lowered an hour later. Within the 3rd drop from the right, a great hollow pendant of Murano glass, were found the Marchetti emerald, the pearl earrings, and every other piece taken from the safe. Chapter 13. Loose Threads. There remained, as Poirot was fond of remarking, the matter of the loose threads. That evening, the palazzo at last hushed. The police departed, save for one officer at the door. Poirot, Hastings and Bordoni sat together in the library, a decanter of brandy between them. The fire was low. Outside, the night was clear, the stars sharp above the canal. "Signor Poirot," said Bordoni, lighting one of his small black cigars. "There are still things I do not understand. Let us, if you would, work backward. The Signora Russo. Ah, Adelina." Poirot smiled. She lied, of course, but not, in the end, in a way that was material. She did see Tarrant in the corridor. She did sketch upon the balcony. Her only mistake was, in the first interview, to deny it, out of an old and somewhat shabby unwillingness to involve herself with the police. She has, I gather, certain debts of her own, and she did not wish her movements examined. And Paolo? Paolo had nothing to do with the matter. He is, as you guessed, a rather sulky young man with a great fortune coming to him. He had no need to hurry his inheritance. He knew his aunt loved him, and that her health was already failing. The footstep he half heard at midnight was Tarrant going to the bedroom. He did not investigate, having no reason to. Mademoiselle Whitfield? A young woman of feeling, briefly imposed upon by a charming villain. She will go home to Boston, and one day she will tell her grandchildren that she very nearly married a thief. It will improve, no doubt, with each retelling. And the maid? Maria? Maria left the carafe in the corridor for 2 minutes, as she said. The 2 minutes, as it transpires, were a red herring. The cyanide had been in the cordial bottle since the previous afternoon. Krause had only to choose a moment when the kitchen was empty. He visited the Contessa frequently. The cook was used to him going to the medicine cupboard. Vianello? Innocent, faithful. A man of dry exterior and considerable loyalty. He had pressed the Contessa for the review of the foundation accounts precisely because he suspected Krause. He had not, however, suspected Krause of being capable of murder. Few men are imaginative enough to suspect their colleagues of so much. Vianello had hoped only for a discreet dismissal and perhaps a financial reckoning. Father Domenico? A holy old man. He left at 9. He prayed for the Contessa daily. He prays now for her murderer, as is his calling. Bordoni nodded. And the chandelier? Signor Poirot? How on earth did you guess? Poirot took a sip of his brandy. It was not, my dearest Pettora, a guess. It was the result of 3 observations. First, the jewels could not have left the palazzo. The watergate and the Calais door were bolted. Second, your men had searched every conventional hiding place. Third, when I considered Tarrant's movements between the discovery of the body and the discovery of the safe, I asked myself, he had perhaps half an hour, where in half an hour, in a palazzo full of police, would a clever man, who deals professionally in antiquities, who knows the construction of Murano chandeliers, who possesses a steady hand and quick wit, conceal a small bag of valuable stones, not in his luggage, that is the first place to be searched, not in a drawer, the second, not even buried in a flower pot, the third, but in a place which the police would, by the very habit of their eyes, never look, namely, above them. The chandelier hangs over every room of the palazzo on the principal floor. Tarrant had only to mount a chair upon the dining table at, say, 4 in the morning, when the household was distracted with the body, open one of the hollow Murano pendants. They are designed. You know to detach for cleaning, drop the jewels in, replace it. The whole operation, 3 minutes, and then he need only wait. Wait for the police to depart, the household to disperse, and the jewels in due course to be retrieved at his leisure. Astonishing. Not astonishing, logical. The thief had to leave the jewels somewhere. The somewhere had to be within the palazzo. The somewhere had to be a place that would not be searched. The chandelier was the only candidate that fitted all 3 conditions. And his glance at it during your speech? That was the proof. Until that moment, my conclusion was a deduction. After that moment, it was a certainty. Hastings, who had been silent for some time, asked at last, Poirot, what was the one fact that did not fit? The fact you mentioned to me at the osteria? Poirot's eyes twinkled. The bell, mon ami. The bell. From the very first moment, when I bent over the body. I noticed that the bell lay too neatly upon the carpet, that the Contessa's fingers had not closed upon air as a poisoned woman's will, that the bell was, in short, not in the place a dying hand would have left it. From that moment I knew that someone had been in the bedroom after the death, someone who had either rung the bell or placed it. From that moment the case began to take on its shape, and from the moment we discovered that Krause had supplied the cordial, that he had an alibi only by virtue of the bell time, that he was the trustee of an irregularly managed foundation. From that moment the picture was complete, and the scrap of silk? Useful, a confirmation. Without it, the case against Tarrant for the theft would have rested upon his lie about the dressing-room door being closed, for he could only have known this if he had been further into the apartments than he claimed. Probable, but not conclusive. The silk was conclusive. Bordoni rose to refill his glass. "Signor Poirot, you and I shall drink, if you permit, to the 2 little grey cells which, between them, have unravelled this thing." Poirot inclined his head. "To the little grey cells, Ispetor, and to the Contessa di Marchetti, who, in her last days, suspected that something was wrong, and was wise enough to summon Hercule Poirot. Without her wisdom, I should not have been here at all. Without me." Well, he smiled, with all the calm vanity for which Hastings so loved and so chid him. "Without me, my dear Ispetor, Doctor, Krause would even now be writing the death certificate." Chapter 14. Departure upon a misted lagoon. 3 mornings later, Poirot and Hastings stood together upon the platform of the Santa Lucia station, awaiting the train that would carry them westward. Poirot to Paris, Hastings homeward to London. The Venetian air was thin and cold. A mist rose from the lagoon and softened the outlines of the city behind them, so that the Campanile stood like dim grey fingers above a sea of cloud. The trial of Dr. Emil Krause was set for the spring. The wires from Vienna had confirmed, in tedious detail, the prior association between him and Edmund Tarrant, a fraudulent enterprise involving forged icons, conducted in 1932, and abandoned only when one of their dupes had died of an apoplexy, and the matter had grown awkward. Tarrant himself faced charges of grand theft and conspiracy. The Marchetti emerald had been restored to the estate, which now passed, with all its complications, to Paolo Marchetti, who had received the news with a sulkiness that did him no credit, and a fortune that promised to do him very little good. Cornelia Whitfield had departed 2 days previously, in the company of Mrs. Beale, by the morning express for Calais. She had wept a little at parting, and had kissed Poirot's hand, a gesture which had pleased him very much, though he had hidden his pleasure behind his moustache. Adelina Rousseau had taken her leave with a cigarette and a shrug, and the casual promise, which neither of them believed, that she would visit Poirot in Paris. Vianello remained at the palazzo, settling the estate with patient melancholy. Father Domenico said Mass each morning for the soul of Beatrice di Marchetti. Now, as the train was announced, Hastings turned to his small friend. "Poirot, does it ever weigh upon you, the fact that, every time your work ends with someone walking to the scaffold or to a long imprisonment, even when they have killed, does it not sometimes weigh?" Poirot considered the question for a long moment, his eyes upon the rising mist. "Hastings, mon ami, I will tell you. Long ago, when I was a young agent in the Belgian police, I learned a thing which I have never forgotten. It is this: that the murderer, when he kills, does not only kill the body of his victim, he kills also the trust which makes a society possible. He kills the small daily acts of confidence, the cordial taken without examination, the door left unbarred, the hand extended in friendship. He kills the unspoken agreement among civilized persons that they shall not destroy one another, and it is for the restoration of that agreement, not for vengeance, not for satisfaction, that I do my work. Dr. Krause did not merely kill an old woman, he killed the trust between a physician and his patient. That trust is precious, it must be defended. So, no, my friend, I do not weep over what I have done. I weep sometimes over what they have done. It is not the same." Hastings nodded slowly. "And you, Hastings, you will go home to London, and to your good cinders, and to your peaceful evenings, and one day, perhaps, when the world has grown stranger still, I shall write to you again and say, 'Hastings, mon ami, come, there is a matter,' and you, fool that you are, will pack your bag at once." "I will," said Hastings, smiling. "I always do. It is my consolation, my friend. It is my consolation." The train drew in beneath the iron span of the station roof, hissing and clanking. A porter took their bags. The mist about the lagoon thickened, and the towers of Venice receded into it, pink and grey and gold, like a city dreamed and now half forgotten. They climbed aboard. Poirot adjusted his cuffs and seated himself with that particular small satisfaction with which he always settled into a first-class compartment. Hastings glanced once more from the window. At the dim water, at a single gondola moving slowly across it, at the great dome of Santa Maria della Salute, rising above the mist like a pale ghost. "Poirot," he said, "one last question. Do you think the Contessa knew, at the end, when she drank the cordial, do you think she knew it was Krause?" Poirot was silent for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, "I think, Hastings, that she did not know it was Krause. I think she suspected, vaguely, as one suspects an uneasy dream, that someone in her household meant her harm. I think Golden daffed me precisely because she could not believe what her own heart was telling her. And I think, yes, I think, that the last conscious thought of the Contessa di Marchetti, as she felt the poison move within her, was bewilderment. Why? Who? She did not know. She died not knowing. That is sad. It is sad. But Hastings, she had done what she could. She had called Hercule Poirot, and Hercule Poirot in his own time gave her her answer. Late, perhaps, but not too late for justice. Never, while there is breath in me, too late for justice. The whistle blew. The train shuddered, and began with great dignity to slide out of the station. Venice fell behind them, softer, dimmer, fainter, until at last it was only a luminous patch upon the mist. And then it was only the mist, and then it was nothing at all but the silver morning of a wide and ordinary lagoon. With the lights of the mainland coming up before them, and the great new day rising upon the water, Poirot folded his hands neatly upon his small, round middle, closed his eyes and smiled. "Now," he said to no one in particular, "I shall have a little nap, and when I wake, my dear Hastings, you shall order me a coffee, with 2 sugars, precisely 2, not, I beg of you, 3. And Hastings, laughing despite himself, and despite the long and shadowed week behind them, promised that he would.